Hello everyone, welcome back to ನಮ್ಮ LaEx Bengaluru presents current issue of the day, episode number 143. In this episode, we will be discussing a very important topic, that is United Nations 80 initiative. What is this UN-80 and how it is significant from our UPSC preparation and why we are discussing, that is covered in today's video. So, we will discuss why it is in news, what are the key highlights, and also we will discuss strategic part, that is what is United Nations as well as the key issues plaguing it and also how do you address it. Okay, all this will be addressed from the mains perspective. Okay, so first is it comes under GS2 paper 2 international relations, global institutions, and also it can come under essay paper under multilateralism or multiculturalism and global governance, as well as ethics paper, global justice and responsibility. Okay, so the context is recently the United Nations under Secretary General for Policy and Chair of the United 80 Task Force, Secretary Generals spoke about the United Nations 80 initiative. Okay, so recently there was a discussion about UN-80 initiative. So we will discuss what is this UN-80 initiative, what are the key highlights, why it is so significant. First, what is UN-80 initiative? It is an initiative that marks the run-up to the 80th anniversary of the reputed United Nations, which will be celebrated in 2025. It is part of a larger United Nations reform and renewal agenda. Very important, reform and renewal agenda. And the initiative was born out of our common agenda report, which was submitted by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He submitted our common agenda, and based on that there will be UN-80 initiative, which is aiming to revitalize multilateralism and make the United Nations fit for 21st century. Okay, United Nations was created according to the 20th century needs. Now it is not 20th century anymore, it is 21st century, and the needs of 21st century have also changed. So therefore there is a need for reforming, revitalizing and making United Nations fit for 21st century. This word is very important for you, fit for the 21st century. You can use it in your answers as well. So key highlights of the UN-80 initiative are, it covered various aspects such as Pact for the Future. What is this Pact for the Future? It is a landmark intergovernmental agreement expected to strengthen global governance across peace, sustainability, digital cooperation and more. Okay, aimed at future peace. And then multilateral reform. One of the major drawback of United Nations is that it is no longer a multilateral institution. It is more of a puppet of powers in hand. Okay, hands of the people who are powerful, such as USA, China, etc., or mainly P5 countries. Here it calls for revamping global institutions like the United Nations Security Council, International Monetary Fund and World Bank to reflect 21st century geopolitical realities. Okay, very important. And then youth and future generations, that is advocates for long-term thinking in policy making, including appointing a United Nations special envoy for future generations. All the decisions that you are taking should not only be focusing on the present context but should also account for the future generations. Okay, that is what this youth and future generation pillar of UN-80 initiative is for. Then about digital compact, that is aims to bridge digital divides, tackle misinformation and promote data protection as well as artificial intelligence ethics. Okay, how you are going to use artificial intelligence for a fair ethical use, and also how you are going to avoid any bias created in artificial intelligence based on the data that has been inputted to artificial intelligence. Okay, and then about peace and security agenda, here it recommends reforms in peacekeeping, early warning systems, and addressing new threats such as cyber security or cyber warfare as well as climate security. Okay, climate change is no longer a hoax and it is no longer an environmental concern, it is also a disaster management concern as well. Then, global financial architecture reform. Here, promotes equitable access to finance, debt restructuring mechanisms, and climate finance for global south. Very important. And finally, reviving trust in the multilateralism, which was lost because of the power play involved in P5 countries. Focus on restoring the trust between citizens and institutions through transparency, inclusion, and equitable decision making. Okay, so remember the key pillars of UN-80 initiative. This can be used as your points for your UN mains answers. If there is a question on United Nations, this can be your points. Okay, considering this, we'll also discuss the static part, that is what are the issues that are plaguing United Nations, how you can address them. So United Nations was initially brought in as a multilateral organization considering the needs of 20th century post the World War II. Over the period of time, that multilateralism converted into bilateralism, okay, with two powers such as US and USSR, and then it converted into unilateralism with USA as the sole power. Now again it is converted into bilateralism with USA and China at the forefront. So how do you address all these issues? So first major issues are outdated power structure, that is the UN Security Council reflects post World War II power dynamics. Okay, the permanent members are P5 countries such as USA, UK, France, China, and Russia do not represent current global realities because there are many powers, there are many regional powers such as India, Brazil, Argentina, Germany, Japan, etc., which have a claim on this permanent status but are not given the representation. Then, example is India with 1.4 billion people and major global influence remains outside the P5 despite being the largest democracy and a nuclear power. In our non-nuclear proliferation treaty and other nuclear treaties, we have discussed about the nuclear power status and what is the nuclear states under the NPT. If you want to discuss about, if you want to know more about that, you can go back and check the video on that one. Then, very important aspect or the major criticism of United Nations is the misuse of veto power by P5 nations. The P5 nations often use veto power to serve their national interests, undermining the global consensus. And example is Russia vetoed several resolutions on the Ukraine conflict, paralyzing action despite international concern. Also, China has misused this veto power for their strategic interests. For example, when there was a call for putting Assad Mazur, okay, who was a chief culprit in Pulwama attack to the international terror group, China used this veto power against Assad Mazur and it opposed inclusion of him into the international terror group or international terror list. Okay, that is how it has been misused by the P5 nations. Assad Mazur. And then ineffective in conflict resolutions, that is the United Nations peacekeeping forces or missions have had limited success in places like Syria, Yemen as well as Gaza, which there is an ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine even now, majorly Israel and Hamas rather than Palestine. The bureaucracy and political influence delay or dilute the responses. Okay, for example, United Nations failed to prevent Rwandan genocide in 1994 and is also passive in ongoing Myanmar crisis of the Rohingya Muslims. Okay, then lack of funding and financial dependency. One of the major drawback of United Nations is the lack of funding and financial dependency. UN agents are heavily dependent on the few countries, mainly USA and China, for funding. This results in undue influence by the major donors. Examples: USA withdrawal from the UNESCO and threats to cut off funding to WHO has impacted their operations. There was a complaint from United States that WHO, because of the funding or heavy funding from the China, acted in favor of China, which resulted in the pandemic or the COVID-19 pandemic. So that is why they are threatening to cut off their funding to WHO as well. If they are independent of these financial hurdles, they can work on their own independently, but that is not the case. So then global south marginalization. Okay, so of all the P5 nations, all the P5 nations are present in the global north. Okay, none of the representatives are from the global south, so obviously it is resulting in marginalization. Developing nations feel underrepresented in key global decisions. There is also calls for democratization of global governance remain unanswered. Example, Africa has no permanent representation in the United Nations Security Council despite being the most conflict prone continent. Same goes for South America as well. There is no permanent representative from South America as well. And also it is slow to adapt to the emerging issues such as cryptocurrency, cyber security, artificial intelligence, pandemic preparedness, and climate induced migration needs urgent attention, where United Nations lack institutional innovation in addressing these domains. So these are certain key issues that are plaguing the United Nations. So how do you address this? Few of the areas have been taken into consideration under United Nations 80 initiative. Rest of them needs certain way forward or the measures, such as United Nations Security Council reform. One of the major issue is United Nations Security Council. How you can reform? You can expand the UNSC to include countries like India, Brazil, Germany, and Japan, or famously known as G4 countries, and also provide certain representation to Africa as well. Okay, make it more democratic and representative. Here, India's stand is that India has been a vocal proponent of multilateralism and reformed multilateral institutions. As famously said that India lost its opportunity to be a permanent member because of certain bilateral and internal issues during the Jawaharlal Nehru regime. So ever since then, understand the significance of P5 states or P5 nations, India has been vocally supporting the stand for multilateralism here. And then restrict or reform veto usage. Here, introduce checks and balances on veto power, especially in case of mass atrocities, okay, such as the one in Uganda, such as the one in Rwanda, and also one in Myanmar. Proposal is use veto power only with 2/3 of General Assembly endorsement. Okay, only if 2/3 members of the General Assembly support the veto, only then the veto power has to be used. Okay, and then empowering the General Assembly, because in reality General Assembly should be given more power because major representation is in General Assembly. So giving United Nations General Assembly resolutions more weight to balance United Nations Security Council's concentrated power. And finally, use UNGA as a platform to build consensus and check unilateralism. Okay, and strengthening peacekeeping and conflict mediation, that is mandate better equipped, quicker deploying peacekeeping forces, improving early warning systems and regional cooperation such as ASEAN, SAARC, etc. etc. These can be used as leverages for improving the early warning systems. And finally, you have to address the financial reforms as well. As long as it is not dependent on its own finances, it has to work on the whims and wishes of the powers which are the key donors. So encouraging assessed contributions from all the member states, which is going to reduce one reliance on select donors, or promote financial transparency and reduce donor influence in agency operations, or develop a particular mechanism where United Nations can generate its own finances. Finally, tackling the new age challenges, that is establishing a new body, a new organ, or a new agency or frameworks to address digital governance, which encompasses artificial intelligence ethics as well as data protection and cyber security and all those issues, and also addressing the climate migration and finance, and also addressing the global health equity in cases of pandemics. Okay, and example, India's leadership in international solar alliance and global digital public infrastructure can guide the reforms. Okay, just a point about India's influence in United Nations, how India can act as a voice of the global south. So this is about United Nations and issues and how you should address. This is in the framework which can be readily used for your UPSC mains answers. Okay, so do make the note of the important subheadings which you can use in your answers. So this ends our discussion today. If you like the video, then please hit the like button, comment on it, and also share with your friends. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe to the channel and also click on the bell icon so that you don't miss any notification. With this, I will end the video. Jai Hind.